We were watching Roseanne, Murphy, Brown, and Cheers. The Soviet Union disbanded. The United States was at war in the Persian Gulf, and the Giants and Bills played one of the greatest games in NFL history. We're in 1991, and this is the Sports Pod Time Machine presented by Yackers Huddle. Let's go. What's up, boys? We've landed in 1991. Bear with me, guys. I want to set the stage here. We got Rich Glanzer. We got Pete Sod. In order to properly re-experience this game, you have to understand the backdrop because it's a backdrop like no other. January 27th, 1991, Giants-Bills, Super Bowl 25. The NFL 100 committee declares this game was the 10th best in the history of the entire league. This game has drama on the field. We've got drama off the field. Arguably, this is the most dramatic backdrop for a sporting event in our nation's history. It's really hard to understand the vibe around this game and the vibe around this period in our history if you didn't experience it, if you weren't there. But the crazy thing is, even if you did experience it, even if you lived it, it's so hard to remember and to put yourself back in that moment because so much has changed since then. I mean, we've been through so much since that time that it's easy to forget the mood of that moment that led up to Super Bowl 25. It was a time of patriotism. It was a time of unity, but fear and anxiety. It's so hard to remember the backdrop of that Super Bowl because since then, we've been through 9/11. We've been through a prolonged conflict in the Middle East. We've become critical and suspicious of our involvement in the Middle East. We live in the age of social media. We have so much information at our disposal that we didn't have then. History has judged President Bush 41. History has judged Saddam Hussein. So it's so hard to put yourself back in that moment. But if we go back to January 27th, 1991, we were united behind our president on his way to an 89% approval rating. Only one president had a higher one previously, right? We had Truman, who had a 91% approval rating the week after the Japanese surrendered. And only one president since would surpass that 89% approval rating. It was actually the younger Bush about 10 days after 9/11. So you have the whole country's behind the president. The whole country's behind our troops. We're behind the soldiers. We're fighting what we think is a morally just war. We feel like it's good and evil, like we're going to go out and take out a bad guy, and we're the good old United States. But we're scared. We're scared of terrorism because we hadn't been down that road before at the time. So there's all this anxiety. You had American banks and British banks were bombed in Europe, so we have no clue what's going to happen here. So we're scared. Remember, it's 91, so we haven't experienced everything we've experienced in terms of terrorism since then. So we're scared. We're anxious. We don't know what terrorism could look like. And in the middle of all this, patriotism, fear, anxiety, you have Super Bowl 25, the silver anniversary of the big game. Richie, what do you remember?
Well, thanks, Dimitri. That I remember now what a filibuster is. I think basically, the unity that you mentioned is just the thing that I remember most. People talk about like, oh, back in my day and stuff like that. And there are things that are better back when we were kids, and there are things that are better now. It was better then as far as unity. We were the United States of America, and certainly, now we're not. And it was just a great time for patriotism, a great time for football, and I'm just really pumped to get into this game.
They weren't even sure they were going to play this game until the day before.
No, I know. It's a lot like when Pete Rozelle played the game after Kennedy's killed. You've got this historical moment where we're scared. This is the security Super Bowl. Like, things that are now taken for granted when you go to a game are all happening at these at this moment. That's when they come up with it all. You've got a league that they feel like they have to play, just like Rozelle felt he had to play after Kennedy was killed. And Rozelle for years had that, he had that feeling that he might have made the wrong decision. But let's be honest, Kennedy probably would have wanted it that way, and I believe Pierre Salinger said it, that Kennedy would have wanted it that way. But it was the same idea. You've got this feeling of something's going to happen. Something bad could happen. But this is something that's unifying. It's something that, even though it's a national holiday, Super Bowl Sunday is a day where the entire country essentially shuts down to watch a football game. It's unbelievable. But yeah, it was I remember it. It was like the first real game that I was very into. But it was definitely something different. So let's get rolling with this one. This is a good one.
Yeah, and it's the day before. New York Times article, President Bush says play ball. So we're not sure we're going to play this until the day before, but President Bush wants to play. Tagliabue called this, he called the Super Bowl a 4th of July in the winter. So there's an importance. It's assumed an importance in our culture over the years, and by that point, it had assumed that role. And the thought was, we need to go through. We need to play this. It's called the Security Super Bowl, like you said. How weird was that? Because you could hear the Black Hawk helicopter, which had replaced the blimp, and while the game's going on, you hear the Black Hawk helicopter flying over, and they show images of it, and the players, the broadcasters are talking about these soldiers with the door open, with the gun pointing, snipers on top of the broadcast booth, security that, like you said, we've become used to, but we hadn't seen at that point. Security checks and barriers around the stadium. It was a whole new world. But we're sitting there, we're watching it at home. The broadcast is on ABC. You got Al Michaels, Frank Gifford, Dan Dierdorf, Richie. Michaels calling the game. What do you think?
I mean, it just was fitting because, the whole 1980 Miracle on Ice, he was the guy. He was, the American announcer, and I just think that it was just a fitting moment for him. And I felt it was a perfect, broadcast.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the GOATs. Obviously, since then, he's further established and cemented his legacy. But Michaels is one of the greats, so you have him on the call. You also have Gifford and Dierdorf. Pete, now, Gifford, we talked about this earlier in the week. What do you think about Gifford, his job there, but just having him on a game like this?
Gifford is an American institution. He was an American institution. There's no one quite like Frank Gifford. He's gravitas incarnate. He really is. Now, he's not the best technical guy, and he's certainly not the best at analyzing what's going on. The game is different than when he played, and he hasn't really grown with the game in that regard. He's not along those lines where he's listening to Tony Romo now is pretty unbelievable how he calls a game. Gifford's not that guy, but Gifford has gravitas and swagger that nobody has, and I don't really think anyone to this day still has it because the way he was, there was just something about this man who just he really transcended from being a player to a broadcaster. I mean, he was with Monday Night Football for so long, and there he is. And in that moment, that swagger is what you need. It's a uniting experience because of who he is.
I also think that like with Gifford there, like we didn't have the nerds take over all the StatCast and all this other stuff at the time, so we didn't know what we were missing, if we're missing anything at all, but we didn't know that at the time. So Gifford was someone like, because that's why Madden was loved. Like, that is the type of announce crew back then that could get away with not doing as much research or, knowing all the facts and everything like that. So that's why I think it worked in this case.
And comparatively speaking, the idea of having Dierdorf, Gifford, and Al Michaels, you have this crew that's sitting there, and in this type of Super Bowl where it's so much worrisome, so much living art, you're watching a game where, Black Sunday and 2 Minute Warning, these movies that came out in the 70s about people blowing up the Super Bowl, you kind of that swagger kind of makes it feel better because you didn't have the booms and the loud, the typical madness. And don't get me wrong, I love John Madden calling a football game, but for this game, it just kind of worked. But I know with Dimitri, Dierdorf.
Yeah, the thing is, Gifford's an American institution. I've got that. He's an icon in the booth. Michaels is on his way to becoming this icon. Dierdorf was the weak link in the group because that group did Monday Night Football. I think I had an 11-year run on Monday Night Football. I always thought he was the weak link in the group. He knew his stuff, especially about line play. He could be funny, witty, but Dierdorf would talk way too much. He was too loud. He'd go off on tangents. But Dierdorf was so good in this game. And I think the situation kept him focused because he tells a story. Years later, he told a story about looking at the Black Hawk with the door open and the machine gun pointed. And it freaked him out. It was unsettling. And I think it kept him focused. It kept him in the moment. He also talked about a meeting with the FBI the week before and how the FBI told them what to do if there was a hostage situation in the booth. The FBI told them, listen, if there's a situation, they're going to come to the broadcast booth. And so the FBI instructed them and told them, this is what you've got to do if you're taken hostage. And it was, like I said, a bit unsettling for him, but I think in the game, it kind of kept him focused. He didn't go off on any of those crazy tangents. He didn't become unfocused. I really thought it was Dierdorf at his best. So Gifford was being Gifford, Michaels was being Michaels, and Dierdorf was at his best. And you're right. I love Madden and Summerall, but in that game, I don't know that it would have been so appropriate to have Madden out there, wham, boom, and this guy over here. I don't know that would have been the time. And I don't know that Madden would have done that, but Madden without that is not Madden. So I think you've got the right team here. They do a good job. We'll get it as we go through the game. It may come up again. The line, Bills by 6.5 at kickoff. It had come down. It fluctuates 7.5. It had been 8. We talk about these lines, Richie. Vegas knows, and they knew the over-under. The over-under came down to the final play. The over-under was 40.5. So they were on with that. The line. I thought the line was too high going into the game, but you tell me, Richie, the line's always not necessarily about what we think is going to happen. It's about the money, right?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, basically, Vegas doesn't want all the action on one team, So what they do is, that's why the line fluctuates throughout the week. They don't want to get killed if one team wins. So that's why the line is. They don't necessarily think that the Bills are going to win by 6 or 7, but that's where the money went. So that's where the line goes. Personally, I think it's a really fair line. I think that if you play this game 100 times, you're going to see Bills win by 6 or 7 a lot of the time. And I think sometimes more. We'll get into it, but I thought the line was pretty accurate, even though it didn't turn out that way.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get there, but it's just, for me, again, just looking at it, not from the betting side, and especially the line's important with a New York team, because anytime you have a New York team, you're going to have money coming in at a different rate than it normally would. But especially just looking at it from the fan point of view, I know this is going to go down as, this great Super Bowl upset, but I didn't really think that. I mean, the Giants had these guys who had won a championship before. They had just went into San Francisco and knocked off the 2-time defending champion. Who you beat matters. And for years, the Giants were going kind of through this gauntlet of, it's us, it's the Redskins, it's the Niners, it's the Bears. I just thought they were battle tested. They had proven it before. And I know the Bills were great, and they had absolutely destroyed the Raiders 51-3 in that AFC Championship game. They'd put up points against the Dolphins the week before, and everybody was into the Bills, and rightly so. But I was like, I don't know, man. Who you beat matters. Who you play matters. I didn't like the 6.5, but like you said, that's not necessarily why they create a line. And then the iconic moment, and this is why I think this game is so great, because you have 2 tremendous bookends, like no other sporting event ever. It's bookended by, at the end, the Norwood field goal, and at the beginning, the Whitney Houston Star Spangled Banner. You're bookended by iconic moments. It's crazy that we even talk about a national anthem, because it's something that we've heard thousands of times in our life. But in that one moment, it sticks out. Petey, what do you remember about that, man?
It's breathtaking. That's the only way to describe her when she goes out there and sings the national anthem. I mean, come on. If I remember right, they repackaged it years later, sold it, and it was number 2. Yeah. I mean, she was unbelievable. It was an unbelievable national anthem. There was something about it. It was so necessary. It had to be done that way. I'm glad it was done that way, especially with everything around this game. But watching her was a spectacular rendition of our national anthem, something that we've heard at every middle school, high school, college game you've ever seen. Every pro game, it starts with the national anthem. And there's something about the way she did it that just brought everything together, made it a perfect opening for this. I mean, even, if I remember right, Roselle was who did the coin toss right after, correct? Right after the national anthem. He was the honorary person. I mean, it really just all blended perfectly into this game where you have one of the best defenses against the best offense. 2 teams at 13-13 going 13-3 and 13-3 going into a Super Bowl game. Granted, the Bills 9 all pros, a little bit different, but yeah, there was definitely something about it.
and you see these grown men crying. And I don't know. I mean, if Whitney Houston does this rendition, at a Tuesday night, Mets versus Cardinals game, I don't know that it's going to have that same effect. But on that stage, man, you're seeing these 300-pound, linemen crying. Marv Levy is one of the iconic shots, him crying. It was wild, and she's out there, and you have two teams wearing red, white, and blue. She's in the white jumpsuit. It was heavy. And then you're right. After 9/11, they actually re-released this again, and I think it goes to like number 6. Arista Records re-releases it, goes to number 6, and it's crazy because it's a song that you've heard thousands and thousands of times, but you feel like you heard it for the first time, and it gave you chills, man. It was crazy.
So
you get the game, yeah, Richie.
So 19-year-old Rich Glanzer. I have to go back. I'm 49 now. I was 19 then. Springsteen, The Who, Zeppelin, Bob Dylan, Whitney really didn't go in that group, like I kind of liked white men.
Which one of these does not belong?
So yeah. So I was like a white man with bad voices, Springsteen, Tom Petty, Dylan, I don't have any recollection of that anthem. I know it was great. 49-year-old Richie would definitely appreciate it because now I like Whitney Houston, because I become a mellower, softer person. I have no recollection of it. I mean, I remember everyone saying it was great, but let's go, let's watch the football, and let's pretend one of these teams are the Jets since they're both New York. So I don't remember it, but I'm sure it was as great as everyone says, but I want to watch the game.
And all right, you get to the game. Now, when you watch this again, right, and it's like knowing what we know now, the storylines, to me, it's legacy. That's the storyline, right? The storyline's the Bills' legacy against Parcells' legacy. Because, and go to Parcells first. Parcells' legacy, the interesting thing, if he loses this game, right, knowing what we know now, if he loses this game, Pete, is he still a Hall of Fame coach? It sounds crazy, but if he loses this game, is he still a Hall of Fame coach?
I believe so. I also believe he stays with the Giants if he loses this game. I think he doesn't retire and we don't get the disaster of Ray Hanley, who seriously screwed up the Giants for several years. By that hire was a mess. Understanding Parcells' legacy is that since 1986, between him, Tom Coughlin, and Bill Belichick, you have 10 Super Bowl wins. And of those 10 Super Bowl wins, you're talking almost a third of the Super Bowls up until now are won by this coaching tree. Now, if he doesn't win, I still think he's in the Hall of Fame, but I also think he might have had to stay with the Giants, done it again, which he probably could have done. It would have been a different world if he didn't leave the Giants. Leaving the Giants, Ray Hanley comes in, Jeff Hostetler becomes the starting quarterback the next year. That next year is just a shitstorm. There's no other way to describe it. It's a bad football season. And Ray Hanley really wasn't prepared to be a head coach. I think he does get in. I mean, he's, like I said, you've got the greatest of all time comes out of his coaching tree. He came out early. He went to Cleveland. Cleveland was a disaster, but he learned in Cleveland. That's why he became who he is today. I think he would. It just would have been a little bit, it would have taken him sticking around a little bit longer, I believe, with the Giants.
Richie?
I think, without a doubt, he's in the Hall of Fame. It's not even close. One Super Bowl win, gets to the Super Bowl with New England, turns the Jet franchise completely around, does really good things with Dallas. I don't think it would have been close. Plus, he wasn't universally loved by everyone, and even the media. Because I dealt with Parcells when I was a Jet, when I reported for the Jets a little, and he was a mean, gruff, but, one of those lovable mean guys. So I think the media thinks of him. They quote him all the time. Now, I know that second Super Bowl helped because, New York loves winners. But he won once, and even with a loss, I think he would have definitely been in because he's done so much for other franchises. He was so much loved by the New York media, which is important. And I just don't think that, I think you'll see when Eli Manning gets in undeservedly, no offense, Pete, but I think that is kind of something that he would be in and he totally deserves it.
It's great because you look back and you think, all right, at first, yeah, okay, of course, he's going to get in these Parcells. I'm telling you, if he loses this game, and you're right, that's the caveat. Pete says, if he loses this game, maybe he stays with the Giants. But if he loses this game, he's Mike Holmgren. Mike Holmgren wins one in Green Bay, loses one in Green Bay. Then he leaves. He moves around. Granted, it's not the same career as Parcells, but he takes Seattle to the Super Bowl. He gets the Seahawks there, but he loses. Parcells and Holmgren would have fairly similar careers. Holmgren has a coaching tree. It gives us Andy Reid, Gruden, Mariucci. If Parcells doesn't win this, he's Holmgren. And you look, I mean, Flores has 2. He's not in. Shanahan has 2. He's not in. George Seifert has 2. He's not in. Parcells loses this. I don't know it, because the thing is also, yeah, he was very loved by the media. You know, he would hold court. He's loved by the fans. But he started to rub people the wrong way as he went from place to place. There's a lot of fan bases that don't look at him the same way the Giant fan base does. There's a lot of members of the media that don't look at him like those Giants beat reporters when he would hold court. There's even a lot of players that don't have the respect for him that some of those players did early on in his career. So it's interesting. I don't know that he's that much different than Mike Holmgren if he doesn't win this game. So Parcells' legacy, you know, and we'll get to legacy again later on, but Parcells' legacy is a little bit up in the air. The other legacy that's interesting here, though, is the Bills' legacy as a team. And we know the story. They go to 4 Super Bowls, they lose them. But does a win here change their legacy? And they came so close. If they win this game somehow, does it change the way, Richie, that we look at those Bills teams?
Oh, 100%. I mean, you know, you look at the Atlanta Braves through the 90s and you know, and how they made the playoffs every year, but they only won 1. But they still won 1. And then you look at the Cleveland Indians, who, you know, had a really good run and they didn't win. I think the Bills wouldn't have been hated because, remember, the 4th Super Bowl, the only people that rooted for Buffalo to get there were the Bills fans and myself, you know, a Jet fan, because I just loved their grit. I love the town's grit. And I think that, you know, if they would have won one, it would have totally, like, now they're winners. But 2, we don't know what happens. Just like Pete said, if Parcells loses, maybe he stays with the Giants. Who knows the confidence? You know, winning's contagious and losing's contagious. You know, you think you're going to do something, you do. You think you won't. I don't know that they don't win other Super Bowls if they would have won that one. So I think it totally would have changed possibly how they would have done in the future. But even if everything else stayed the same and they just won that one, yeah, they would be looked at much more fondly than they are now.
You know, I don't know. Before I'm kick it to Pete in a second, but Jim Kelly, James Lofted, Andre Reed, Bruce Smith, Thurman Thomas, Marv Levy, all these guys are already in the Hall of Fame. And yeah, we were down on them for a while because it's like, oh my God, we got to watch them lose another Super Bowl. But these guys, they're not only are they loved in Buffalo, but really throughout the NFL, they have a certain respect. Obviously, you want to be a champion. You know, obviously there's something different about being a champion, but it's weird. And I think maybe it's a situation unique to football because we see these teams a lot, but I don't know that them being a champion really changes the way that history looks at these guys, because you can compare it to those Minnesota Vikings teams. The Vikings teams lost 4, and look at all those guys. You know, I mean, Bud Grant's in the Hall of Fame. Eller, Page, Krause, Tarkenton, Tingelhoff, Yari. I mean, all those guys are in the Hall. It's a weird thing. I think because we watch every week, I don't know, except for quarterbacks and coaches. Quarterbacks and coaches have that stigma if they don't win. But in football, I think because we see them so much, it's almost like you don't necessarily have to win. Whereas in the other sports, and we've talked about this before, Richie, it's like, go back in baseball, those late 70s, early 80s Expos teams. You know, those Expos teams in the 80s. No one remembers them because they didn't win anything. You know, in basketball, the Trailblazer teams that went to 2 finals and lost. The Nets teams that went to 2 finals and lost. I think in the other sports, you have to win to kind of cement that place. But in football, whether it's those Vikings, whether it's the Bills, whether it's like the Love You Blue Oilers, it's almost like because we see them so often, I don't know that you need to win to kind of solidify your place in history. I'm not sure. Pete, what do you say?
Well, you got a team here with 9 All-Pros that season, 5 Hall of Famers, and I think history's treated them pretty well. But they are the lovable losers. If you really think about it, you make it to all these Super Bowls and you can't win one. And that goes to partially to the, you know, we'll talk about it later. Marv Levy, and that I don't think they ever really had the balls to go out and take a win. They found ways to really sit back and sit on their laurels in the biggest games of the season. I think they've been treated pretty well. I mean, to have 9 All-Pros, 5 Hall of Famers off of that team, I mean, come on. History has been pretty good to them. They have been. It's just if they had won a Super Bowl, who knows? Who knows how many more people would be in the Hall? Who knows how many more All-Pros they would have had? I don't know. It's something. I think they've been good. They've been treated well, but they may have been treated even better.
Legacies are a weird thing too in sports. I mean, we don't always define legacies the right way. You know, we kind of dumb them down a little bit, but we're going into this game. We don't know the Bills are going to win, are going to go to 4 straight Super Bowls, and we don't know what's going to happen the rest of Parcells' career. So it's just knowing what we know now. I think those 2 legacies kind of hung in the balance a little bit. All right, let's get to the game. 3-play replay. You know the rules. 1 play. We each pick 1 play. We don't include the ending. It's a 3-play replay. I take a play. Richie takes a play. Pete takes a play. Again, we do the ending separately. 3-play replay. We look at 3 plays. I'm going to go first. It's a 4th and 1. And this fired me up. This play fires me up because not only is this play – and it doesn't get talked about at all. It's kind of lost in the shuffle. It's not considered a major play in the game, but it's a game that not only defines the Bills in this game, but I think it's why they lose 4 Super Bowls in a row. I think it defines who they are. So we're in the second quarter. I think we'll get to Andre Reed a little bit later. We're in the second quarter. We're on the 50-yard line. We've got a 4th and 1. Reed drops a ball on 3rd and 1. Now we're 4th and 1. Kelly just comes off the field. Right, we're early in the second quarter, a 4th and 1 on the 50-yard line. Kelly just runs off the field. There's not even a thought to go for it. And it's not something I noticed watching the game the first time. But you're going to see 4th and 1. It's not even a thought. Now, we know that Kelly's the guy who called the plays. It's not even a thought. Punter comes on. It's 4th and 1. It blows my mind. I know that then it wasn't the standard to go for it. I get it. But that team was not the standard. That team was doing things that no one else had done with the no huddle. It was what they were doing was very different. So now you're 4th and 1. We know Belichick had the game plan. It's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We know he was playing with the 2 D linemen most of the game. He was trying to get them to run the ball, okay, which was not necessarily their strength. So here we are. We're 4th and 1. What the Bills can easily do. And at worst, they can just come up to the line and see what the Giants do. And I get it. Football was different in 1990. I understand. But the Bills were different. They were not your average 1990 football team. This is where the Bills basically kind of, I think, withered in the spotlight. 4th and 1, if the Giants decide to go with the 2 D linemen, you're going to pick up the automatic first down. In fact, Thurman Thomas was picking up 9 yards a pop. So you come to the line. If they give you that look that they've been giving you most of the time, it's an automatic first down. If they go into their base defense, now you say, all right, here's our chance to run the stuff we would normally run. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. You can call a timeout. You could check out of the play. But even if you go for it and don't get it, you're still the 50-yard line, and you should have that. You're in the Super Bowl. You have to have confidence in your defense. But it just bugged me that it's not even – I mean, Kelly just runs right off the field. And, again, didn't notice it the first time. But it's like you're on that stage, and it's almost like you didn't want to win the game. It's this weird thing, and I think it became their personality for the next few years. Good enough to be there, but in that moment, and all these moments would follow, like Thurman Thomas not being able to find his football helmet, which would happen 2 Super Bowls later. So these little things like that, it's just like they weren't ready for that moment. And it seemed like they were never ready for that moment. And it fired me up so much because it's like the Giants understood what it takes to win, right? Having to go through the Niners and the Redskins every year and their early battles with the Bears. And it was like the Bills didn't. And you had it right there. 4th and 1, seize the moment. Don't give them back the ball. The whole thing they're trying to do is just possess the ball. You have the ball. When you have the ball and you have the best offense and you need 1 yard, go take it. And I just felt like in the grand scheme of things, you don't notice it the first time around. But when you see it again, you're like, man, this is why these guys don't win one of these Super Bowls, because it's right there, 4th and 1, you're on the 50. Take advantage at that point. You're the one now who can call the shots because, like I said, if they give you the look that you want, automatic first down. If they don't, well, now there's options. You're going to see what you want to do. But, dude, it fired me up so much watching this. And what do you guys think on that 4th and 1?
I'll go first, I guess. So we talk about legacy. This is why the Bills' legacy is accurate. This is why the Giants' legacy is accurate. I mean, obviously things have changed, and now you wouldn't even think about, you would just obviously go for it. It was 4th and 13 from their own 20. I mean, that's how bad that was when I'm watching it, because you forget about it, obviously. You know, we don't remember that. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, Kelly's just happily running off the field. Like, you know, I mean, my God, how did not they go for it? This is why they deserve their legacy. They're like I remember, it's so funny because we talk about legacies and how it's not really fair. Like, Joe Flacco threw a perfect touchdown pass to Lee Evans, and Lee Evans drops it. Instead of going to 2 Super Bowls, he went to 1. He probably would have won 2 Super Bowls. We would have been talking about Joe Flacco instead of Eli Manning in 7 years. But this is the legacy that the Bills deserve. They are not champions, and that play right there defines why they're not.
As I said earlier, the lack of testicular fortitude. You're running an offense. You are the quarterback who is calling every play, because that's the way Ted Marchibroda has set this up for you. And you are jogging off the field like it's like Richie said, like you're 4th and 12 from your own 20 going, what am I going to do? You're in the biggest fucking game of the year. This spectacular
of your life, the year, of your life.
This is the silver anniversary for the Super Bowl. You got all this shit going on around it, and there you are going, you know, I don't have the guys to go for it. Yet you have, 9 all-pro players on this team? What is wrong with you? And this is, we're going to get into Marchibroda later because it drives me nuts. You are the offensive coordinator of one of the best offensive teams ever. And you should be yelling at your fucking quarterback, get back on that field and run a play. Run a play. Or at least, as you said, come up to the line. Because nowadays, you know what they do. They go to the line, they sit there, and at least they try to draw you off sides. That's the way the game's played now. Why? Where was the brain cell? This is ridiculous. It was ridiculous. And you are, Richie, I think you're right. It defines them. That's why people look at them the way as the lovable losers. They couldn't figure out a way to win it, but they lack balls. No testicular fortitude.
Yeah, I mean, being a champion is a mindset. And you see in that moment that they don't have it. And it's just that the one play from their 4-year run that you see that, man, these guys, they're a great team. But it's not a championship team. You have this offense. It's one of the greatest ever. She's come up to the line. And, Pete, you're 9 all-pros. It's not like these were all on the offensive side. You have this defense that is full of athletes that you need to have confidence in. And you're saying, we're going against the backup quarterback. Even if we don't get this, okay, we're okay. It's fine. We're at the 50-yard line, even if we don't get this. But the idea that this wasn't even a consideration, and that you just look at Jim Kelly's face, like it's like he doesn't look to the sideline, or it's not like the coach has to be like, you know, this kind of give and take with the coaching staff. It's like, nope, I'm just sprinting right off and, you know, getting to the, you know, the Gatorade cooler. It just watching it again, you know, watching it as a 15-year-old, 14-year-old, you don't think about it. Watching it over the years on replays, you don't think about it. And then I'm sitting there rewatching it this time, and it just fired me up like very few plays I've ever seen. So it's defining.
You're saying it. You're going against a backup quarterback in Jeff Hostetler, who you know, we've spoken about this a bunch of times. You know how I feel about Hostetler.
Oh, it'll come up. We'll get there.
I'm a huge West Virginia fan. He comes out of WVU the whole 9 yards, and he's not the guy that, you know, you saw how, watching this game, you saw he was not the best passing quarterback you could have out on that field. And your defense is really good. It's not, you got Bruce Smith on that freaking line, on that defensive line.
There's athletes all over the field too. And
sitting there, and that's why I said, you know, Ted Marchibroda at some point in Marv Levy's got to say, what are you doing? Take a timeout and send him back out there. Do something, because at the minimum, you are the better team at that moment, just simply on the fact that you're starting Jim Kelly.
Yeah, and it's
Jeff Hostetler.
Right, yeah. Absolutely, man. It's not a known play. It's not a play that we really look at. It's not a play that history remembers. But you look at it, and it's like, man, this is, you know, come on. Now, from that, we go to a play that is remembered. Richie, you're going for 3rd and 13 here, and this is a play that, yeah, it is one of the more notable plays in the Super Bowl. But, you know, there's a couple of different looks at it, man. Go ahead.
So, everyone remembers the Amani Toomer play. They 3rd and 13, he gets it. And I did a little deep dive into that actual play, and so
Amani Toomer.
You know what? I was thinking of
that's the problem with doing a show with an old man.
Yeah.
Everybody remembers the Gifford catch. Okay, no, dude. Let's. It's it's Ingram. Mm-hmm.
I know. I was. You know what? It's so funny because I'm thinking of a quote that I had from Toomer back in 2000. Anyways, so let's get to that play though. So everyone knows that, but let's go into the deep dive. It was 3rd and 13 from 32, and this is what I have on this. I don't know if you could see this here.
Awesome. So thanks for the visual.
He catches it at the 25.5-yard line. Okay. And the first thing he does is he evades Kirby Jackson. Now, the funny thing is, if this was 4th down, they would have just put a line, right? They would have just put a line at the 1st down mark, and they never would have let it get him. But they didn't want him to get the field goal, and it turned out to kill them. So he catches it at the 25.5-yard line. He evades Kirby Jackson. Then comes Darryl Talley, who, he was just a great player that year, So there are 3 Bills. I wish we could show the pictures. There's 3 Bills chasing, and you have Darryl Talley, and he's chasing him 2 or 3 yards behind him. And then all of a sudden he makes this juke, and you see Kelso just lose it. Like he just goes, and he's like out of his underwear. And it was just one of the best jukes I've ever seen. I watched it like 3 or 4 times. It was so fun to watch. And then all of a sudden, you get to hear this one player's name. He caught 4 balls his whole career that year. And what happened was Troy Kyles, he's a wide receiver. He stays with his block, and he sends James Williams several yards back. So James Williams, nobody knows, that wide receiver, Troy Kyles, who nobody knows, he knocks him several yards back. And all of a sudden, now Williams, he has to run to get him, and he can't do it. He tries, but he's able to deke him. And then there's 3 to 5 Bills on the ground. They can't get to him. And Williams then, he grabs his shoe, but at this point it's too late, and Ingram just dives to the 1st down, gets it, and Troy Kyles, he walks off like a freaking boss. So much so, I thought it was Howard Cross. But then I was like, wait, that's 87. This guy's number 84. So we did a little deep dive, and I went into his career. I Googled him, and this is what he did when he had a couple of catches against Detroit. He said, but he was a rookie, undrafted, and the practice squad wasn't invented. It was invented that year when the season started. So he was cut. If it wasn't for a practice squad, he's not on the field. So he said both catches felt pretty good, but I didn't think this would go on forever. I don't have any guarantees for the rest of the season. I just have to work every day, keep a positive attitude, and hope for the best. And this is my favorite part. So there's a coach of the Giants. Then he said this coach. On both those passes, he had to make one adjustment and did. Phil saw it and got the ball to him. After the game, I told Kyles they had so much respect for you, they didn't even cover you. He laughed. He isn't experienced enough for a one-line comeback. And that was Tom Coughlin who said that about him. And
wide receivers coach.
Yeah, the wide receivers coach. So then I decided, hey, let me see if I could find this guy on social media. So I find his Facebook, and I message him. And it turns out it wasn't the guy. And he goes, oh, I wish it was. But it looked like him.
Message a random guy who blocked you and got a restraining order on you. Awesome. We move along.
Let's not talk about that, So, but anyway, it was just an amazing play because, everyone went for the single tackle instead of, just trying to hold them up, all right, you get deep first. And then my teammates are going to come. If it was 4th down, they would have had him easily because they would have had that mindset. But they all wanted to make the field goal tougher. And then Deardoff, who I think just said something so awesome. I'm going to read this here. Every now and then in a football game, you can look back to a play, and it might set the tone for everything that happens after that. If the Giants win this game, they may look back at this catch and run by Mark Ingram. And, I agree and disagree with what he said. I mean, obviously we're going to look at that, and Ingram's going to be, this forever giant, as I guess Amani Toomer would be for me for some reason. But so Ingram is like, that was a great thing. I don't think it set the tone for the entire game necessarily, because the Bills came back and scored, and I don't think it deflated the Bills. It might have deflated the Bills in that drive, and certainly led to the touchdown where Dierdorf called it the best drive of all time in any Super Bowl. But it really defined to me also the Giants' legacy, because they shouldn't have been able to get that first down, but they did everything they could do to get that. And they didn't give up. And it was like they went for it on that 4th and 1, 4th and 2. They went for it, and they got it.
Maybe a little thing, too, with that play is that if Sims is in the game, I don't know that the play happens. And Hostetler has mentioned this before. He's this young guy. He's a backup. In fact, a few weeks earlier, he was contemplating retirement. The play, obviously, it's Ron Hart's the offensive coordinator, and they think that the Bills are going to be back a little bit, and so they want to hit Ingram coming across the middle, set up some blocks, and hopefully they can get that first down. But when you have a 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11, 3rd and 12, 3rd and 13, whatever the play is, most quarterbacks are going to throw to the sticks, especially most veteran quarterbacks. And Hostetler says this, if it's later in his career, and Sims has even chimed in on this, that if he's out there, chances are you're going to throw to the option that is either at or beyond the sticks. And it's just an interesting thing that it's this backup quarterback who says, I kind of, I'm just kind of maybe the word where they say I'm too young, too dumb at the time. But Hostetler says if this is a few years later, he may not throw that pass. He may have just looked for somebody down the field, and completion, we move on. Sims is kind of, in talking about that play, has kind of, I don't know his words exactly. I've heard Hostetler's words, but, Sims indirectly has kind of hinted at the same thing. So it's just interesting that, this is, we'll talk Sims Hostetler later. We don't want to step on that discussion, but it's just kind of dumb luck that if you don't have this younger, inexperienced guy in, or he's a few years further down the line, he looks for one of his other options, not necessarily that option. And if we go to our third play, you talk about Hostetler. Pete, Hostetler to Bavaro.
Hostetler to Bavaro in the 4th quarter, 19-yard completion. That leads to the bar go-ahead field goal. You have to understand, like I said, I am a West Virginia fan. Jeff Hostetler is a West Virginia alum. He married Don Nealon, the former coach of West Virginia's daughter. I'm not a huge Hostetler fan, but you have to understand he was managing the clock so well this game. If I recall, in that drive took 7 minutes and 32 seconds, I believe it was. And it was unbelievable, because out of nowhere, a guy who's been kind of shaky all game. Now, granted, he had legs and he could run, and they could run rollouts all day long, it seemed like, because he was able to run. But that pass to Bavaro, he finds Bavaro, who, let's recall, was in Super Bowl 21, was just unbelievable with Sims, and he hits him for that 19-yard play. I mean, when you watch that play and you see him it just seemed like it was destiny. We talked about it before with the legacies of the Giants having an instinct. It just seemed like they had an instinct and he knew what to do at that moment. He hits Bavaro, and all of a sudden they're in field goal range and they're going to take the lead. I mean, it wasn't perfect. It was far from perfect. I mean, Hostetler had a good game, 22 for 32, 222 yards with a touchdown. Those are good numbers. But that 19-yard, that throw was just, it was something of of what a championship team should be doing. I mean, it's not, and they didn't, if I remember right, they didn't advance the ball any further after that. They had to kick the field goal. There was no other plays after that worked, but that put them in a position to take the lead, do what needed to be done, and then basically they were going to rely on their defense, which is what the Giants did. I mean, that was the Belichick way. Belichick's defense was the way they were going. It was all about the defense that game.
Good when they had to be.
Yeah,
they were plays that you have to make.
Yeah, and they were bend don't. That defense was bend don't break, and that they did it all game long. But they 7 minutes. I mean, they held the ball. I think they still have the record for time of possession in a football game.
They had over 40 minutes in the game, which is wild. Which is why the Bills should have taken the opportunity they had at 4th-and-1 on midfield. Now, the time of possession had not swung to that extent yet, but you could see early on. You see what the Giants were doing or what they were going to try to do from early on.
Exactly. But that pass, like I said, for all my gripes against Hostetler, that was the moment where I think that's what created his career after, was that play. That play showed his set of cojones and his willingness to go. Now, granted, earlier in the game, you saw Kavanaugh, the backup, warming up because he was getting pummeled left, right, and center.
Oh, yeah, Giants fans had to be psyched about that.
I mean, how many times did Kavanaugh actually take the field? I mean, I don't remember. It was he was in no one. Hostetler was a no one too. I mean, how many years was he on the taxi squad?
Like we said, Hostetler, before Sims gets hurt against the Bills, Hostetler had talked to his wife about retiring and saying, listen, I've been doing this a few years. I'm not seeing the field. Let's go on and do something else with our lives. And this is going to give him a whole second life in football, which we'll get to. But
I think about that play. One thing about that play, kind of like about really the game for Hostetler is like, really say like, when you're on Facebook and Instagram, you're showing the highlights of your life. It's not really, you don't really get into the deep nitty gritty of your life. You're just like, hey, look at me, I'm on a waterfall, but you don't really see the 10-hour car ride to get there. I'll kill you, So I think the big thing about that play was it was a highlight of the game for him almost. It was such a good throw. I think if he's showing his kids, his grandkids, the game, the kids might be like, oh, Dad, you missed that one. Wow, you really missed that one. Jesus, were you even good? That throw was a good throw. That and he got open. I almost said Shockey. What's wrong with me? Bavaro got open.
Yeah,
and it was a good catch, good throw, good route. And it was one of those where it's like, I'm an NFL quarterback playing in the Super Bowl against Jim Kelly. And you know what? I might not be worse than this guy. That one throw. And I think that was really like a really impressive play.
And it's fitting, too, that it's to Bavaro because, obviously, what Bavaro has meant to that team. And he says, for all intents and purposes, Bavaro says that, his career is over after that game. He goes on. I mean, he still plays a few more years, tries to make a go with the Giants, winds up with the Eagles or the Browns. But, he says that's kind of, his knee was already falling apart. And he says that was the end for him. But early in that game, Hostetler misses a wide open Bavaro, on the very first drive. And you're starting to think, as someone who's rooting for the Giants, you're like, ugh, if Sims is in there, come on, man, this is an easy touchdown, or at least, we would have been marching down the field. So it's kind of fitting he hits Bavaro. But now, all right, we hit those 3 plays. Before we get deeper into our categories, let's get back and just talk about the ending. I mean, the ending it's a historic ending. We know how it ends. So the Bills down 20-19. They're going to get the ball with a little over 2 minutes left. Kelly is going to he's going to scramble. That's going to take us to the 2-minute warning. They're going to come back from the 2-minute warning, and ABC is going to have this graphic. Field goal attempts on grass over 40 yards. Scott Norwood only 1 for 5 in his career over 40 yards on grass to that point. It was a 41-yarder against Miami in 1987. So we know what's going to happen to Norwood, and we know the heat that he's going to take, but it's not something that he had done. What they're going to wind up asking him to do is not something that he had much success doing. And the reality is, on grass, over 45 yards is kind of a 50-50 proposition in NFL history. So, it's not going to be an easy thing he's going to be asked to do. And maybe they don't do the best job of putting him in a great position to win that game as the drive goes through. What do you say, Rich?
Well, if it's 50-50, it wasn't 50-50 back then. It was much under. It was probably a lot under 50-50.
Oh, for him, sure. I'm just saying in general.
I know, but yeah. So if this guy was Adam Vinatieri, in his prime, this was a really good drive. I mean, I just couldn't believe watching it and knowing what we know now, but they knew what we knew now. Like, they knew that he wasn't a good field goal kicker. They knew he was a bad field goal kicker, and they settled for this. And so I'm just going to talk about something that I was a reporter for Long Island News Tonight. It's a station that, for interns and stuff like that. So, but we would go out in the field, and I'd cover the Jets every Wednesday. So, every Wednesday there'd be big press conferences. They'd give you food. And one day, it was a Friday. I was like, you know what? I'm hungry. Let me go to the Jet practice and go to the press conference. There was no food. It was just the beat reporters. I was totally out of place. But it was such an awesome experience because what happened was after all the questions it was a very quick one with Parcells. and they had just lost to the Colts to basically ruin their season. It didn't look like they were going to make the playoffs. Everyone turned their camera off and their recorders off, and they went to Parcells. And they just started speaking to him, like, and I was listening, and it was so fascinating. They start talking about that game. And he said two things that stuck with me, Jesus, over 20 years ago. He said on the Giants' last drive, they had a play that could have got a first down for sure to Bavaro, and they didn't take it because they wanted the Bills to use the timeout. And he was going to regret that if they lost the game. And then I asked one question. I go, did you think that Norwood was going to make it? And he goes, no. He hadn't made that kick all in practice, like before the game. So I didn't think he had a chance. Of course, you're worried, but I didn't think he was going to make it. But yet the Bills handed the ball off to Thurman Thomas, and Parcells actually talked about that play too. He goes, he knew that was coming, but there was nothing they could do. Like Belichick was screaming on the sideline that they're going to hand it off to Thurman. But to me, that made and he wanted that in a way, Belichick, because he wanted to get to Thurman. But it just made no sense that Kelly would agree to that. And there was 7 or 8 seconds left out of bounds, and Norwood came on and Kelly came off. Like it was nothing. Make another play, man. You need another 10 yards.
It's the whole drive. It goes back to that 4th and 1 play. Right, their identity had been established. They know what they needed. This guy had never made a kick over 41 yards on grass in his life. You know what you need. They were not willing to go out and do what it takes or what it took to get into the right range, and they settled. And it's just part of their identity, part of their DNA, almost like they were scared to go out and win the game. Make plays, dude. You have studs all over the field. Go out and make plays. And they were just reluctant to do it, and they settled. They were okay with getting to the 30, but the Giants, more importantly, the Giants were okay with allowing them to. It was almost as if it was like this invisible line that was up, which pretty much they'd been doing all game. Pete says, bend but don't break. It was as if these guys say, hey, this is where we know he can't make this kick. If we keep them outside the 30 or even outside the 27, the 28, and the 25, he's not going to make this kick. So we're going to give you that. And that's all the Bills took. And it was the same thing all game. The Giants decided what they were going to give the Bills, and the Bills just went along with it rather than pushing the envelope and making the plays they needed to play.
You know what? I want to just cut in 1 second.
Yeah.
It's just like the Ingram play. Because you had the line that he had to get to, and the Bills individually tried to make it that he didn't get to that line, but they didn't do it as a team, and so they failed. The Giants, as a team, knew what line that they were very happy to let the Bills get to, and they let them get to it. But as a team, they wouldn't let them get beyond that line, and I think that's why the coaching. When you have Hostetler versus Kelly, like Pete said, Hostetler versus Kelly, it's over. It's over. But it wasn't over.
It should have been over. I mean, watching that and watching what's going on. I mean, Dimitri, I certainly agree with the idea that this was their identity, and they just did not know how to step on someone's throat and end it. But the Giants kicked the living shit out of the Bills physically all game long. Andre Reed, how many balls did Andre Reed drop? He looked awful. He did not look like a Hall of Fame receiver, not even close. Now, granted, they're giving Thurman Thomas 9 yards a carry, but they were beating them up. It was gang tackling. It was Belichick telling his defense to go out there and take someone's fucking head off and make sure they know you're coming at them. And that's what they did. It could have been more that they cowered it out because they were getting beat up badly. Don't get me wrong. Hostetler got hit a lot. Hostetler almost left the game. But the Giants, even with Kavanaugh, if he had to come in, they were going to run a ball control offense. That's the whole game is ball control. On the defensive end, on the defensive side of the game, you just saw that they just kept beating them and beating them. It was hit after hit. And I think that might have been part of it because the Giants just really – they abused them. They abused the receivers, and they gang tackled every play. And it was just a way to make sure the Bills knew that you couldn't do what you did to everybody else. We are not some AFC West team. We are a team in the NFC East that play the Cowboys, that play the Redskins. We had to deal with the Bears, and we had to kick the crap out of San Francisco as well. The week before, you've got the hit. You got the Leonard Marshall hit the week before. This team didn't give a shit, and they hit you hard. That was their redeeming quality, because you're walking into the Super Bowl with a backup quarterback. You better be abusing people. And they did. And I think the Bills I think they were scared. Part of it was being scared of what they were up against. They were up against a team that you got Lawrence Taylor, who's, let's be honest, quite possibly the greatest linebacker of all time. And he kept that team, riled up and nuts. And Belichick knew how to play it and make sure they knew what they were doing. And
that's a good point, because to end on that with this, I think you look at it and you put all this on Norwood and say, if he would have made the field goal. But the reality is the Giants made sure that field goal was from a distance that was going to be in their favor, and the Bills did not do what they had to do to get that field goal to a distance that was going to be in their favor. And so it's just not this thing that's just left to chance where, oh my God, Norwood should hit this kick. The reality is, like we said, for any kicker, it's a 50-50 proposition historically, 47, 48 yards on grass. But for this guy in particular, it was way less than a 50-50 proposition. So too much is kind of put on Norwood missing it, as opposed to the Giants understanding, keep them outside the 30, and the Bills not doing what it took to get inside the 30. But I'll tell you what, though, the interesting thing is with Norwood, and then we'll get into our categories, give the Buffalo fans a lot of credit, man. Buffalo gets back from this Super Bowl, and the next day you have a 25,000-person rally at Niagara Square, and they are chanting his name, dude. We want Scott. We want Norwood. And they made this guy feel the love. And, it's easy for him to maybe have become like Buckner became in Boston for a while, or Bartman became in Chicago. It didn't happen. These people showed him a lot of love. I think it was one more year that he had with them. His numbers had been going down already. One more year, and he was cut. He made a field goal in the following year in the Super Bowl against the Redskins, but he was gone. And then Steve Christie kicked for them for a while after that. But listen, Norwood is he takes too much on his shoulders for this, because the Bills definitely could have done more to make this a makeable kick. And you give the Giants credit, like Pete says, dude. They knew what the heck they were doing.
As much as the Bills fans loved him, I mean, let's be honest, though. Norwood then becomes basically the basis for Ace Ventura. The whole idea of that, he was the guy who missed the field goal in the Super Bowl. That whole movie is based on Scott Norwood, So
laces out.
Exactly. He becomes that, and you're right. He does not deserve what he got, but he sort of does. He sort of does.
When you're on the biggest stage, it's going to come with it. But it's good that at least the Buffalo people showed him some love, and it said a lot, I think, about their fan base. But the reality is, looking at it, it's like, dude, the Bills, and we'll get to Levy and Marchibroda again, but man, your kicker, get inside the 30, and the genius of Belichick and Parcells, we keep him outside the 30. He's not going to make this kick. So it's easy to say, okay, well, Norwood is kind of one of the one of the goats, or one of the scapegoats in this. Categories. Let's start with the MVP. Pete, your MVP of this game.
Meggett. I know that it's a controversial pick. I mean, without Meggett, Dave Meggett records 129 combined net yards, 48 rushing, 18 receiving, 37 on punt returns, and 26 on kickoff returns. He may not have over 100 yards rushing. He is a little guy who's like, 5'7", 5'8", tiny little running back, third down back. Without him, he's their spark plug that game. He really is. It always seemed that anything good happened because Dave Meggett created it. And that was my feeling about him. Now, Meggett has a lot of issues after the fact, but in that game, without him, without that spark plug, Otis Anderson does not earn over 100 yards.
It's interesting, and Parcells says this. He goes back to this a lot. He talks about game changers and playmakers, and he would always say, if you have guys who are going to make plays and who are going to change the game, if you have more of those guys than the other team, usually you're going to win the game. And Parcells loved Meggett. Years later, I mean, he brings him to the Jets, but Meggett had nothing left at that point. But yeah, I mean, he's big. He's little, but he's big in this game. Absolutely. Richie, your MVP.
So, I felt Anderson and Meggett were a really nice 1-2 combo, and I'm not trying to be the contrarian here and give it to someone who didn't win the game. I don't normally would do that. I wouldn't normally do that, but my God, Thurman Thomas. People say that, they wanted Thurman Thomas to run. They actually wanted him to get 100 yards. They didn't want him to get as many yards as he did. 100 was probably where they were okay with. But looking at it, 15 rushes, 135 yards, 1 touchdown, a 31 long. Receiving 5 for 55 with 15 being long. Just so consistent. He was so consistently great. And that's the person we talk about legacy that doesn't deserve his legacy, probably, for the missing helmet. He was a winner. He did everything he could. It was a dumb play to hand the ball off to him and not pass it 20 yards because they were never winning it with that kick. But he did what he could. He got the yards he needed on that last play and got out of bounds. He did everything they asked him to do and more. He was the best player on that field by far. You notice we didn't really talk too much about Taylor, about Bruce Smith, about Jim Kelly. The players that all have big, giant names. But Thurman Thomas, my God, what a game. And listen, if it's Abbott and Costello, Cheech and Chong, then you give it to the winner. Cheech won, Chong lost, give it to Cheech. But Thurman had such a better game than Meggett. It wasn't even close. Thurman had such a better game than Anderson. It wasn't even close. He was the MVP.
Statistically, people say it's one of the bigger snubs in Super Bowl history. The only thing I think you gloss over it a little bit, Belichick for the entire week was on his guys saying, if this guy gets 100 yards, we're going to win the game. And his guys are looking. Of course, your instinct is to stop the other team. And Belichick kept saying, if this guy gets 100 yards, that means we're doing the right thing. We're taking the pass away. We're changing their entire offense, and we're going to win the game if he gets over 100. So that's my thing.
109.
Yeah. Sure. And no, listen, and yeah, and the reality is he only had X amount of touches, and they only had the ball for under 20 minutes. So would imagine what had happened. But the crazy thing, a lot of it was by design, and we're going to get to Levy and Marchibroda in a second. But the Giants give them this, and they didn't take it until later in the game. And if you read up, Belichick says we were shocked because we're saying, give the ball. We're giving you this, and you're not taking it. His numbers should have been even bigger than they were because it takes the Bills a while. It takes them too long, actually, to go to Thurman. Belichick, we talk about Googling it. You will find that he says, we were shocked because we were basically saying, we'll give you Thurman Thomas, and they didn't take it until later in the game. When they did take it, it was 9 yards a pop, but they probably should have done it sooner. Listen, statistically, it's hard to argue, but I'm saying that it's part of the game plan to have allowed this guy to do this. So he's not necessarily my MVP. My MVP is the MVP. It's Otis. And I get it that it's a symbolic one. It's just symbolic of the fact that they controlled the ball for 40 yards. And you're not going to give the MVP to the coaching staff and to, the 5 offensive linemen more when you throw in the tight ends. You're not going to give the MVP to all those guys. So I think Otis is just it's a symbolic award. I think it was at the time. I think it still is. It's interesting. I know we were a lot younger. Pete and I are like 14, 15 years old watching this game. Rich, you were like 50. But, okay. But, the thing about, and I'll tell you though, at the time, we don't realize who this guy is. Otis, Otis was from 79 to 82. His numbers were as good as anybody in the league. Like, this dude was like legit one of the top running backs in football, arguably the best. I know Dickerson, 83, 84, Dickerson's numbers just blow everybody out of the water. But Otis was the man. And he falls apart in 85. And in 86, they trade him to the Giants. He actually got a Super Bowl in the other, a touchdown in the other Giants Super Bowl win. We forget that. And he's just kind of this Parcells would call him the old dog, and he resurrects his career. 89, he's the comeback player of the year. 90, he makes the team where he's not sure he's going to make the team. It's a great story. He wears the practice pants during the whole playoffs, right? He had the dirty pants on, and he wouldn't change his practice pants, right? He always had the grass stains and the mud on it. I think it's a great story. I'm going to agree with you guys that, listen, was he the most valuable player in this game? Not necessarily. I just think it's a symbolic award. It represents the fact that you won this because you had the ball for 40 minutes and because you control the clock and you control the line of scrimmage. Although we'll talk about it. I don't know how much they control the line of scrimmage, but it's a symbolic award. I think it's right to go to Otis. Now, yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, it really, it's hard to argue. I mean, he did deserve, I felt he was the best Giant. So the best Giant on the winning team, and like you said, it could have been a lineman.
Right.
Never going to happen. But
so here's the thing. Fine. So the MVP, but that's the MVP. Let's go to the more interesting one, right? Every time we look at one of these historic games, we got our MVP, and then we got should have stayed in the locker room. Should have stayed. I'm going to start, and I've already kind of hinted at this. Should have stayed in the locker room. It's Marv Levy, and I'm going to say I like Marv Levy a lot. I respect Marv Levy. I think Marv Levy is a great coach. I think the job of a coach is just to put your players in a position to be successful. I think for the most part, he would do that until he got to these big games. I like Marv Levy. I think a lot of guys overcoach. I think more coaches hurt their team than help their team because they overdo things. Levy let these guys play. Levy put them in a position to be successful. But ultimately, attitude reflects leadership, right? Remember the Titans. Attitude reflects leadership. And it's just like in these games, he didn't have the killer instinct, and they suffered because of it. And maybe not having that killer instinct, maybe not being overbearing is what allowed him to coach the team for so long and have so much success with them. But on that stage, he really needed to push the envelope, and he never did. And almost he took a back seat, to his players, which is great a lot of the time. But I think on this stage, there were times when Levy really should have kind of stepped up, where you needed to see that fire, where you needed to see a sense of urgency. You didn't see it this game. You didn't see it the next 3 Super Bowls. Again, I think he's a great coach. He's historically great. The players loved playing for him. They played hard for him. They were always in a position to be successful. But on this stage, Levy kind of just slinks away from the spotlight. His players wind up slinking away too, because you're going to take the lead from your coaching staff, or you're going to take the lead from your leaders. So Levy should have stayed in the locker room, man. It was disappointing on that stage. That's my take.
I went to high school with Marv Levy, actually.
You went to high school, but yes.
Did you graduate before him?
No.
no. Bowsham South, 19. No. He definitely, and that's gonna lead into mine, if you don't mind, because I think that you're right. Everything you said about it is right, and the Bills were a little soft, which we didn't realize it. But Dierdorf even said at one point, he goes, the Giants, the Giants are battle tested, and the Bills, they've won so many easy games that when it got into a dogfight, they weren't ready for the fight. So mine was Andre Reed, because Andre Reed dropped some balls, and listen, he didn't just drop the balls because oh man, it didn't work, my hands didn't work. No, because the Giants were crushing him every time he caught the ball. He caught so many balls. He had a good start to the game, but he kept on getting hit because the Giants played so tough. And I think that leads into where where Levy was a little soft, and unfortunately Andre Reed, when he goes to sleep that night, he has to realize those drops probably cost him the Super Bowl. What do you think, Dimitri?
Yeah, no, I think, and that's all of these guys were never as good on that stage as they were through the season and through the AFC playoffs. And I think you have to put a lot of it on their leaders. Obviously, you expect Kelly to go to a different level. You expect Bruce Smith to go to a different level, Cornelius Bennett. You expect these guys to go to a different level. But ultimately, you're going to take your lead from your leaders on the field, but you're also going to take your lead from the coach. And again, all the love for Levy, and I think honestly, it's the way to coach. Just be hands off to a certain extent. Let your players play. Put them in a position where they're going to be able to develop properly. You're going to have a system that's friendly to them, that's going to allow them to excel. I think that's what coaches have to do. Again, I think too many coaches outsmart themselves. Levy, there's so many great things to say about him, but not on that stage, man. Killer instinct.
I want to say one thing. Talk about leadership, and Dimitri, you have it, because it was time to go to Pete, and Pete just up and left. Not a word. We didn't know where he went. And me and you, being the professionals that we are, stretched. It's called a stretch, where we had to say, Levy wasn't good.
Allow me to apologize. I had to let the dog out, much like you would have. I got 2 of them that, they run to the door and they got to go. But
You think Bruce Smith should have stayed in the locker room?
Oh my God! Now, granted, he gets the safety. He's credited with the safety against the Giants, but Bruce Smith, quite possibly the greatest defensive lineman ever, sucked the entire game, but for one play. He was awful. They just were able to contain and control him, which is something that you don't hear about Bruce Smith ever. He is that good of a defensive lineman. He is in the Hall of Fame. He was an All-Pro. How many times was he an All-Pro? I don't even remember, but it's insane. He did not have a good game. The Giants figured out a way to game plan him, and they did it with a backup quarterback once again, and an offensive line that was good but wasn't great. It wasn't a great offensive line. It was a smart offensive line, but definitely not one of the best offensive lines in the game. And he just didn't look like Bruce Smith. I know he had issues, he had family issues before the game. I get it. But this is the biggest game of your fucking career. You're quite possibly the greatest defensive lineman ever to play the game. And granted, it's early in his career at that point or earlier in his career. But he didn't go anywhere. He's credited with the safety. That's it. Nothing else.
Yeah, I think it's a theme. It's a theme with these guys who should have stayed in the locker room. It's a theme that it's Buffalo Bills who don't live up to their potential or who don't have that killer instinct on that day. It's guys who got the job done for 4 years. In reality, even before those 4 years, they had some pretty good teams. And after those 4 years, they have some good teams. So it's guys who got the job done year after year after year after year, got it done in the regular season, got it done in the playoffs. But on this stage, man, they couldn't. And whether you want to say the coach Marv Levy, whether you want to say these leaders and these captains, Jim Kelly, Andre Reed, Bruce Smith, dude, on the stage, they don't get the job done, man. They should have stayed in the locker room. Unsung hero. For me, it's Hostetler. I start watching the game. I'm like, all right, Hostetler's not on. He misses the pass to Bavaro. And part of me says, if Sims is in this game, they win by a lot. But as you watch the game, I don't think that that's true. You know, Sims could not have run all those little naked rollouts. So unsung hero for me, it's Hostetler. The whole thing for them was ball control, controlling the clock, and all those little plays, 2-3 yards a pop, those little naked rollouts, those boots that they were doing all day with Hostetler, it chews up the clock. Sims could not have done that. Hostetler is the unsung hero, man. He rises to the occasion. You said it earlier. He hits the big pass when he needed to, the pass to Bavaro. And he's superhuman in holding on to that ball on the Bruce Smith safety that should have been a fumble and a touchdown. So he's superhuman there. Hostetler's definitely, the team rallied around him. They loved him. He had come into a game earlier in the year, one of the more historic comebacks in Giants history, because Sims had gotten hurt in Week 7 against the Cardinals. Hostetler comes in. It's one of the great comebacks. Ironically enough, they win 20-19. I think they had been down, was it 19-7 or something, 19-6, and Hostetler brings them back in the last 7 minutes of the game. The team rallied around him. They loved him. But all those little plays, you would not have, I think Parcells might have come out with the same game plan, but it's just, I don't know that you would have been able to execute the same game plan with Sims, Hostetler. And you see how good he was, dude. People forget he goes on to a great career, 33-22 as the Raider starter. A lot of Raider fans, you talk to these guys, they say, you know what, Stabler, Plunkett, Gannon, and then, maybe LaMonica, and a lot of them think Hostetler's the 5th or 6th best quarterback in Raider history. He was hurt, but he had a good run with the Raiders. This guy was a good quarterback. And I think he's the unsung hero. Go ahead, Richie.
No, I mean, I think actually Hostetler is a good choice. It's not my choice.
Who do you got?
Well, you know what? I was gonna go with the shot. I didn't know who was gonna go. So when I looked at this, I gotta go with Tom Coughlin, and I'll tell you why. We're talking about unsung heroes.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get any more unsung than the wide receivers coach. So you want to pick the we know what Coughlin's going to be, but dude, the wide receiver. I mean, why you could pick the Gatorade kid.
My friend Troy. Well, my friend Troy Kiles, who I talked about earlier,
yes.
Someone who I have a good relationship with. But you saw all your fawning over Hostetler, the guy who missed. Wide receivers being open, constantly open. He missed every throw that was incomplete. There was a wide receiver that was open. And again, I'll look at my friend Kyle's. He was the one that, well, I'm not even really joking, to be honest with you, because I mean, that one play, you just saw all the wide receivers just pushing their guy back that I was talking about before. And I mean, these guys, they had the toughness. These wide receivers, you don't think of wide receivers as tough, but let me tell you something. if Andre Reed, you switch, Andre Reed would have caught those balls. These Giants had grit. And we talk about we're talking about Belichick and we're talking about Parcells. Well, obviously the wide receivers coach did a great job because the wide receivers were constantly open. And they were tough. They caught the balls that Hostetler somehow threw to them. And so we go to unsung. Yeah, you pick the star quarterback. I'm going to pick a guy that was actually unsung.
No, you know what? And I will say just real quick, if attitude reflects leadership, if these guys are tough and they're gritty, you do give credit to their position coach, because we know what Coughlin, in hindsight, right? We know what Coughlin is going to become. We know his personality, and there's no doubt looking back right now. And in football, people don't realize how much time you spend with your position coach. I mean, you spend all day with your position coach, right? So these guys really do take on his personality. So, all right, I've got Haas, you've got Coughlin. Pete, unsung hero.
Look, I got to rely. I'm going back on Dave Meggett once again because without Dave Meggett, there is no spark to that Giant offense. He just seemed to be in the right place at the right time. When they needed something, he did it. Whether it was returning punts, whether it was, some sort of play on third down, something. He was always there. And as you said earlier, Parcells loved Meggett, loved him, and that's the guy. And I can't really say much more than I said for my whole, why I believe he should have actually been the MVP. He just was the guy the Giants needed at a given moment to make things happen, because without him, the Giants their offense stalled. He was just the guy.
Go ahead, Rich.
No, I was just going to say, I think for our homework assignment, we're going to look up the word unsung. And I'm going to say it to you. It's not celebrated or praised. One guy picks the quarterback. The other one guy picks who he thinks should be the MVP.
It's a backup quarterback. Jeez. Yeah, and you pick the guy who's giving out the Gatorade. I mean, that's not sung. I mean, at all. That's like not even. Jeez. Anyway,
he's the guy who carried the freaking mic wire for Parcells.
Yeah, right. That's it. The get back guy. Mm-hmm. That's Rich's unsung hero.
Didn't they go to high school together? Once again,
love the get back guy.
He's 100, something like that. I mean, come on, man.
No, but Meggett though, and because it's brilliant. And again, it's where the Giants coaching staff wins this game of chess. The Bills defense was super fast. They fly all over the field. And they kept using Meggett with with the draws, counters, traps, and these guys just come flying up the field, and Meggett would get these, these quick hitters, these pops of, a couple of yards here, a couple of yards there. So they use them really effectively. So we got Meggett, we got Coughlin, we got Haas for our unsung heroes. Upon further review, all right, so this is we're going to look back, and something that when you look at this game, something that just jumps out at you now that you watch it, years later. For me, it's just the telecast overall. I enjoyed it. Listen, the fact now we have so many graphics, we've got so many camera angles, we do so much with the game that I think the telecast actually takes away from the game now more than it adds to it. Looking back and saying I'm watching a game in this January 1991, there was enough technology where you're getting a bunch of looks, you get your instant replay, you get your on-screen graphics, but it doesn't take away from the game. We've gone to the point where the telecast isn't adding, it's taking away. So just real simple for me, it was just kind of it was just a more pleasurable telecast to watch than I'm used to. So, upon further review for me, it's the telecast. Pete, what do you say?
Oh, the fact that they actually used instant replay and it didn't take away or time away from the game. The instant replay during that telecast, they went to instant replay, and the system back then, without coaches' challenges and all the other bullshit the league has put in, it just made a lot more sense. And it was used in the Super Bowl, and it was used effectively and efficiently. And then they got rid of it, and now we have this disaster that, where they go to wherever to freaking watch the game, and you're like, Jesus Christ, I can get up, go take a crap, come back, and they're still in an instant replay. Come on, move the game along. The game's got to move. We understand it's, you got time frames, you got to sell advertising, the whole 9 yards, but it was efficient. It made sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because they had it from 86 to 92, which you forget, and there were no challenges. The replay officials were in a booth, and they would basically signal down if there was something to replay, or the officials could just basically call for a replay. The problem was it was a bit ambiguous. It didn't really define, what officials could replay or what they would replay. So they had to fine tune the system. But ultimately, dude, you're right. Like they went through these replays, and I think there was a limit from the time that they signal for the replay. It had to be done in 2 minutes. So this wasn't the kind of, and that you appreciated that. It definitely needed fine tuning. But you look at it and you're like, dude, we could be doing this a lot better than we're doing it today.
Why it's better? Why it's better then? And you're right. Both of you guys, by the way, are 100% right. And why it's better then than now is because now the person that made the initial mistake is still looking through the little box, in freezing weather, and to see if it's like, oh, can you rewind it? I'm like, he's cold. Like get a 15-year-old nerd to watch it in New York City and go, hey, the ball hit the ground, you idiot. You don't need to run 60 yards to get to that little booth. It was perfect. And you were right too. Both of you guys, for the first time today, got it 100% right. I'm proud of you guys. You're improving. You two guys could have been the unsung hero if we would have done this afterwards. But I got something a little better. I have to trump you guys a little.
Coming from Grandpa, that's just a compliment and a half.
All right, go ahead.
Here's a question. Would you kill baby Hitler if you saw him? Would you kill baby Hitler?
Knowing what you know now, you're going to save a lot of lives.
Yeah. Well, baby Hitler was at that game. And here's why. The coin toss, believe it or not, and I actually do believe this, the coin toss was the reason that this game was the coin toss was the reason why this game was won, because they were able to get the ball at the end, and they were able to get the ball at the beginning of the half. And I think somewhere Bill Belichick uses that pretty perfectly right now.
Well, Grandpa, your TV's on in the background. You may want to shut that off, even when he makes a good point. Grandpa Richie, it's you know what? It's definitely interesting because
probably edit that out.
No editing. Listen,
no editing
Grandpa's going to make mistakes.
At least you didn't crap your pants. Congratulations on that one, Grandpa.
Well, the Mets, by the way, are not having a good day.
Coin toss is it's become a lot bigger. It's become a lot bigger. At the time, you wouldn't have thought about that. So here we go. So how about this one? If you would have told me then that blank, I would have told you were crazy. If you would have told me, so if you go back to 14-year-old Pete or 15-year-old Dimitri or 75-year-old Richie, if you would have told me then that blank, I would have told you were crazy. For me, obviously, looking back, there's no way that you're going to say that, well, the Giants defensive coordinator, as good a job as he does, is going to become the greatest coach in history. The Giants wide receivers coach is going to go and win 2 Super Bowls and is going to have a Hall of Fame career. But that Parcells is going to leave a few months later, and the Giants are not going to pick either of those guys to succeed him. They're actually going to take Ray Hanley, who then will basically destroy this team over the course of the next 2 years, which they'll then have to try to rebuild with Dan Reeves. So if you would have told me then that 2 of these guys are going to become coaching legends, I would say, well, that's crazy, but okay, fine. They're going to become a coaching legend with the Giants. Nope. They're going to become coaching legends, well, one with the Giants, but years later, one elsewhere. Instead, you're going to have Hanley come in and absolutely that they would just kind of totally botch the pick for Parcells' successor when you have 2 greats on the staff. That the way that drama played out, I would have said, that sounds like a crazy story. But it does, man. It plays out that way. And it's for a different podcast, but who would have thought that years later, another 2 great Super Bowls would come down to 2 guys on this Giant staff? And again, it's a different podcast that we're going to get to down the line. But the fact that Belichick and Coughlin will square off 2 times years later, with seeds being planted, I think, from this game, by the way, in that matchup, all that stuff. I think if you would have told me then how all that panned out, I would have told you were crazy. Richie, what would you have said was crazy if we told you back then?
I think just that Buffalo is kind of like, a sad sports city, like the Mets, like Cleveland, before LeBron, and like kind of like if you're a Met and Jet fan, like just look at the pain that this franchise and the Sabres, like they just can't get out of their own way. The Sabres had a great chance to win the Stanley Cup, and they call in the crease every play, and then Brett Hull scores the overtime goal, and they're like, oh, we're not going to look at this one, and it's just like it's a sad, very fitting. And now I guarantee if this baseball season finishes, the Buffalo Blue Jays will be the first Buffalo team to win a championship, because it's like fitting. I think that that Buffalo would become such a sad sack of a sports city with such passionate and great fans.
Pete, if we would have told you then that blank, you would have told us we were crazy.
I'm going to ride your coattails again, and I'm going to go back to what I said earlier on, which was the fact that basically a third of the Super Bowls since 1986 have been won by this giant coaching tree. And yes, the Hanley disaster is also just, I to this day as a Giants fan, it's just it upsets my stomach and gives me diarrhea when you think about it. But I mean, the fact that Belichick leaves the Giants, goes to Cleveland, basically has a okay run, not great, makes the playoffs. But then when he gets to the Patriots and all of a sudden he just explodes. And you're right, the seeds are all there. He game plans out like nobody else. And it's unbelievable. And it's just, you watch the Patriots play and you see what he did in the Super Bowl. You see it. You see the type of guy he is. And then once again, like you said, Coughlin, a freaking wide receivers coach, leaves, goes to Boston College, becomes a head coach. Then he becomes the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, finds a way, gets him to the freaking AFC Championship game. And then he comes back to the Giants, and he's the only guy to beat Belichick twice.
Yeah, the prodigal son returns. Yeah, and the crazy thing, too, with Coughlin is he had been hired by Boston College already. So he was on his, he was gone at that point. Boston College had hired him a few weeks earlier, but he was just finishing out the season. How cool is this? He calls his recruits. You talk about the ultimate recruiting tool. He calls all the recruits from the locker room. And imagine this, like, how pumped up are you to go play for this guy, right? I mean, he's calling and he's putting Giants on the phone, and he's like this, and as a 17, 18-year-old kid, you're like, dude, my coach just won the Super Bowl and he's hanging out with Lawrence Taylor. So the ultimate recruiting tool in that celebration, which was a muted celebration, by the way, because of everything happening, they didn't have the crazy raucous, like, champagne going all over the place. It was definitely a very muted celebration, but you're still winning a Super Bowl, and he's able to call all those BC kids, which was pretty cool.
He also should have beat the Patriots 3 times, right? Because wasn't he was the president when they lost to the Patriots a couple of years ago in the AFC Championship game?
Could have.
And the thing was, they're up by 10. And Brady fumbles, they recover it, score a touchdown, they're up by 17. The game's over. Brady's not coming back from that. But the stupid referees, as often is the case with that franchise, blows the whistle and says, all right, it's your ball, but you don't get the touchdown, and then and then they come back and they win. That's 3 times he beat Belichick. So this guy who the unsung hero of that everyone pretty much agrees with, this guy's a pretty smart guy, and we don't got to get into this podcast, but a Hall of Fame career, I definitely think so.
Pat your back a little more, Gramps. Pat your back a little bit more.
It hurts. I can't reach.
Today's peacock is tomorrow's feather duster. So let's take a look back. So today's peacock is tomorrow's feather duster. A guy from that game that you looked at on that day, and you say, wow, this guy's going to go on to some great things. And it just doesn't turn out the way that maybe we expected on that day. Unfulfilled potential, maybe fall from grace, whatever it is. Today's peacock is tomorrow's feather duster. For me, it's Ingram. And again, it doesn't have to be a guy who had a bad career, but that day, I'm thinking Ingram's going to break out, become this superstar. Remember, he was a first-round pick out of Michigan State, right? In 87, he's a first-round pick for them. I think, all right, he's ready to take that next step. And especially, he had this great – Hostetler had a really great relationship with Ingram and with Baker, which is, by the way, another thing. Sims didn't throw as much to those outside guys. So if Sims is in this game, we don't go as much to Ingram and as much to Baker. Sims didn't really target Baker was the touchdown maker. Not that Sims never threw to them, but didn't throw to them as much as Hostetler did. So especially when you find out that Hostetler is going to become the starting quarterback the following year, I really thought Ingram would go on to some great things. He has a good year the next year. In 91, he's got 51 catches, 824 yards. It's okay. But then, he falls. He falls to 27 catches. He's off to Miami. Has 2 good years, okay years where he's catching passes from Marino. Ingram never became the guy that, for me, I thought he was going to take that next step. Never happened. So today's peacock is tomorrow's feather duster. And obviously, not only does he never take that step in his career, but we know that Ingram, of course, has his issues off the field as well, where he winds up behind bars. And it's not a great story. It's not a great tale for Mark Ingram. So today's peacock is tomorrow's feather duster. For me, it's Ingram. Richie.
Yeah, so I mean, with being 3 white guys, I think we have to say this. Meggett, had just a terrible. He was a great player, for what he could do, but off the field, he had a lot of issues, and I think he had 9 kids with maybe 9 mothers or close to around that. So he was always broke because, they say on a diet, you can't outwork your diet. Like, no matter how you work out, if you eat bad, you're still going to gain weight. Well, no matter, you can't outwork nine baby mamas. And unfortunately, he, sexual assault, and he got convicted of rape. And he's now going to spend the rest of probably his life, 30 years, I think he got charged with. And, I think that's important that we bring that up. Because,
I don't know about baby mamas and whatever, but the guy's a scumbag and a rapist, and he's behind bars. And it's sad because the reality is that that's one thing. Upon further review, we could say that sticks out to you. You watch it, and you're like, dude, this guy. For me, my favorite football player was always Al Toon, but Meggett was probably second, only because I thought I could be Meggett. Right? 5'7" and running fast, and and I was like, this is my guy. And it's just disheartening that these guys, some of them are not who you think. Now, I will say this from spending time around a lot of these guys like you did. The reality is, a lot of pro athletes are just like a lot of people in the real world. Most of them are wonderful guys, great guys, but some of them wind up letting you down. And you look back on some guys and say, man, I rooted for him, and he was a scumbag. And it's something that it's you look back and it pops out at you. Lenny Dykstra was another one. Lenny's got a lot of issues. That was always my favorite baseball player. So some of these guys kind of they let you down, to say the least. Pete.
Ted Marchibroda. Holy shit. You come up with this offense for Jim Kelly that is, let's be honest, something innovative, something that really was never done before. And it was, everything you could ever want from the offensive side of the football, and your quarterback's calling plays. And what did you do when you needed that quarterback to get that 1 yard, going back to that 4th and 1? You became the world's biggest pussy. And that's all he was. And let's be honest, his NFL career as a head coach wasn't very good. He was with the Colts, if I remember right, even before. He was at the Colts before this, if I remember correctly. And then he had
a head job. He was coaching the Colts in the mid 70s. So he had already had a head coaching job. But at this point, just to follow up on what you're saying, going into this game, it's not Belichick Belichick's a hot commodity, but Marchibroda is actually the hottest commodity of assistant coaches when this game begins.
Exactly. And there you are with no balls at a quarterback that's probably one of the best in the game at that point in time, and you did nothing. Nothing. You had a chance to actually slam down on the Giants' throats, and you didn't do it. Ted Marchibroda, then he leaves. He became the Colts coach again in the 90s, if I remember right.
Yeah, he coaches again with Baltimore. Mm-hmm.
With Indy.
With Indy and then Baltimore. So he becomes the Indianapolis Colts coach, and then he becomes the Ravens coach. So he's going to have 2 more head coaching jobs.
And how many playoff wins does he have?
It's a good question. I mean, look, he did not have a lot of success. I don't think he got to the playoffs.
I don't believe so. And that's my point. He was the big recruit. Everybody wanted him, and he sucked, plain and simple.
It's a letdown, like a lot of those Bills guys were. A letdown, unfulfilled potential. And yeah, that's the thing. When you look at it, he had already had a cup of coffee as a head coach, and he was older, but because of how prolific that offense was, he was a guy that people were looking at for these jobs, more so than the Giants assistants who wound up going to have these great careers. It was Marchibroda, when the reality was, you give him credit, but of course, when you have Kelly, when you have Thurman, when you have Andre Reed, those numbers are going to happen. But still, give him credit for the whole K-gun thing, the no-huddle stuff. People think that was a gimmick at the time. The reality is, look how football's played now.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
We play football that way. You don't see, especially on the college level, you don't see teams huddle up. What the Bills were doing, I think, has become a just basically a regular thing. So definitely it wasn't some, gimmick that was just going to fall by the wayside. It kind of, that offense, in a sense, changed football. So you give credit there, but Marchibroda never became, what we thought he might be at the time. Let's go to the internet. The Internet College of Knowledge. Useless but interesting facts we learned during our research. And we do a lot of research. So some pretty cool things that we learned. This I already knew, but it's the halftime show nobody saw. Interesting. New Kids on the Block performed, and it was the first halftime show that was going to be more than like marching bands and stuff. But we didn't see it because they went to the news coverage. So instead of watching the halftime show, we basically cut to ABC, NBC. They all basically went to the national news, Peter Jennings. And so that's what we saw. Peter Jennings, Sam Donaldson, those guys came on, right? So we didn't see the New Kids. Actually, they aired it after the game. They aired the halftime show. But the interesting thing about it is I think that gave people the idea that viewers did not necessarily have to watch what was happening at the stadium at halftime. So the following year, Fox airs a halftime special, the In Living Color halftime special. And they timed it for the exact amount of time that halftime lasted. And this gives birth to all these, you had the Butt Bowl with Beavis and Butthead, where they would have, their own halftime, and you would turn to MTV to watch Beavis and Butthead. You had Celebrity Deathmatch, the Death Bowl. So it basically has all these years, it leads to all these years with Super Bowl halftime counter programming. And people who were paying a lot of money to advertise during the Super Bowl did not like this. They started to put a lot of pressure on the NFL to really up their halftime game. And now you have the spectacle that we have. So this actually, it was pretty important, not just that New Kids on the Block is the halftime nobody saw, but really what it leads to. That I already knew. What I didn't know, atropine. Atropine is the antidote or an antidote for in case there was a chemical attack. The NFL has the entire national supply of atropine on hand. It's wild. And just in case that there was a chemical attack. Not only do they have the entire supply, when the game was over, they sold the supply, which they had bought from the government. They sold the supply to the NBA in case something happened during the NBA playoffs. And then the NBA sold it to Major League Baseball in case something happened during their playoffs. So terrorism for the next few months was definitely on the minds of Americans. I did not know that. Gail Gilbert is going to play in 5 straight Super Bowls. He's a backup quarterback. He's a third-string quarterback for the Bills, and then he'll be a third-string quarterback for the Chargers. So, that's the answer to a trivia question. And the Giants. I did not know that their real name is the New York Football Giants. It's actually their legal name. They are the New York Football Giants Incorporated. So some useless but entertaining facts that I learned. Pete, what do you have?
Let's start with the fact that Pepsi had a $3 million contest that they were going to run during the Super Bowl, that because of what happened, they could not run it. They could not do their $3 million giveaway because of what was going on with the worry of terrorism and so on and so forth. It was one of those things that just didn't fly. Here's another one. Bart Oates, center for the New York Giants, passed the bar exam that year. Became a practicing attorney, on top of still playing football for, I believe, another 3 or 4 seasons, if I remember right. Mm-hmm. He played with after he left the Giants, I think he was with the 49ers for a bit, but he was an attorney. And then the question of the day, who called the game for the radio call? Do you know?
I have to say Boomer Esiason, probably, right?
Well, Stram always did the color.
Stram did the color.
Stram always does the color on the radio for these Super Bowls. And the play-by-play, Stram always did the color. Go ahead, man. It's got to be one of these legendary guys, like who's coming? And Enberg would do the.
I wonder if it's a news.
Hold on. Yeah, go ahead. I'm gonna say a Buck.
It is. It's Jack Buck. Jack Buck called the Super Bowl for the radio network with Stram as his color man. And, it was a much different way than his son calls the games now, although his son is good. He sometimes annoys me. But, yeah, Jack Buck was the voice of the game. He was the play-by-play man.
Richie, what do you got? Anything you learned? Useless knowledge.
Really, I kind of wanted to stick to football because we were talking about Norwood. So I was like, let me look at Barr. And I had no idea. He won the 1979 Super Bowl too with the Steelers. And I just kind of find that like pretty interesting because how many kickers have won the Super Bowl with two different teams? I mean, the only one I could think of is Vinatieri. Maybe there are others. But, just two clutch guys that just really that got it done. And Barr was, for that Steeler team, for the Giants team, just two really tough teams and two really historically tough franchises, two historically winning franchises. I mean, Jesus, it's like the Steelers and the Giants are just trading off multiple Super Bowls here and there. And I just thought it was pretty cool that, this guy who was a football player, he wasn't a kicker. He was a football player.
I think he makes the tackle on the opening kickoff.
Yeah, he had one little bar, right? And which is a little surprising considering he made those tackles. And it just was a clutch kicker. And I was glad he won another Super Bowl because, one's not enough. I'd want to win more.
You're like the Barr of this podcast. Like, he's way too old. You don't think you should still be here, but you kind of are. As a 30-year-old, you probably appreciated that 1979 season.
Richie, with that whole thing about the Steelers and the Giants, here's another piece of that useless knowledge. They're related. The ownership families are related. You've got the actresses, Rooney Mara and I forget her sister's name. They're the kids of them. They're married off into these families.
She was in House of Cards, I believe. House of Cards, maybe even Entourage. I think one of the Maras.
Yeah,
a lot of things. And these those two franchises always mirrored each other. Definitely the Steelers and the Giants kind of always mirrored each other. Always had the ownership styles were very similar. Steelers got a few more than the. What are the Super Bowls at though? Steelers have more.
Yeah, Steelers have 5, 6.
So Steelers got more than the Giants. Let's open the time capsule. All right, let's go back to 1991. Open the time capsule. Top 5 movies of 91: Terminator 2, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Home Alone, Silence of the Lambs, and City Slickers. Top television shows of 91. 60 Minutes is there like usual. Roseanne, Murphy Brown, and Cheers. Beverly Hills 90210 is not one of the top shows rating wise, but it's definitely like ascending to like that place in pop culture that it takes. I love 90210. Yeah. Top songs of 91. I Adore Mia Moore by Color Me Bad was number 1. But a little further down on the list is Good Vibrations by Marky Mark. And just two things to point out about pop culture. Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch. At the time, who would have known that Marky Mark Wahlberg goes on to the career that he has, right? I mean, the dude winds up with a good career, man. Boogie Nights, The Departed. He's Mickey Ward in The Fighter. He's going to be an executive producer of Entourage, Boardwalk Empire, Ballers. If you would have told me then that Marky Mark was going to go do all these things, I would have been like, what? So Marky Mark is the Funky Bunch and the Underwear Model at the time, but he's going to go on to some pretty cool things. And the only thing about the movies as a sports fan is City Slickers. That poster of City Slickers with Billy Crystal and his Met hat. What a fraud. I mean, listen, Billy Crystal, dude, you're the biggest Yankee fan in the world. And in City Slickers, you're wearing the Met hat. Because, dude, the Mets were the team. And, from 84 into the early 90s, the Mets were the team. And so Billy Crystal's going with everybody else. He's got the Met hat on. And even in his other movies, When Harry Met Sally, they talk about going to the Mets game. This guy doesn't mention the Yankees in any of his movies. But just like a lot of other people, when the Yankees get good in the mid-'90s, all of a sudden Billy Crystal is the biggest Yankee fan who ever existed.
Like Pete, right?
But Pete's legit. But Crystal, I got to say, was a fraud. He says that he wore that hat in City Slickers because the Mets would always contribute to Comic Relief, those shows he did for HBO, and the Yankees would blow him off. I don't buy it. I think, listen, this guy's on the bandwagon. The Mets were the popular thing at the time because he would always mention the Mets, all right? It's not just City Slickers. So it just, as a sports fan, I got to say, Billy, if you're listening, fraudulent.
He's probably not.
I'm just saying, you don't know, Billy. Come on, buddy. And then all of a sudden, when I was a kid, and all the like all, like a lot of Yankee fans, right? When I was a kid, this and that. But Billy disappeared in the tough times. So that's what I got to say.
If you are listening, Billy, I like you. Continue listening. Help promote us. Don't listen to Dimitri. We can replace him.
Listen, I laugh at some of Billy Crystal stuff, but I do take, come on, dude, the Met hats, and then you're going to tell us you're the biggest Yankee fan in the world. You want to hang out with Giuliani, and you want to be at all the world. Okay, stop. Anyway,
Richie, as for my Yankee credentials, my whole life, I was there when they stunk. I was there when they were good. I will always be there. Dad was a Yankee fan. Grandpa was a Dodgers fan, so that was a whole other story. But I've been a Yankee fan. I was at the stadium in '84. I was there watching when Winfield and Mattingly were battling out for the batting crown. So it's,
No, I know, but you know what's funny though? I know. But what's funny though is
but you gotta bust your balls a little bit back.
That's true. But people that are 30 years old, 30, 34 years old, only know great Yankee teams. Like they don't remember. I mean, and it's just crazy. Like that would bother me because I thank God I'm a Met. We can't get in this topic, but I think I'm a Met fan because I want the pain. I also want some good times.
Masochist.
I will give you two words. Jeez. 2 words that, as a Yankee fan, that I make my stomach turn. Stump Merrill. That's all you need to say. I lived through Stump Merrill. Now is enough.
Those teams, those teams just weren't good. Late '80s, early '90s. But Billy Crystal knows they weren't good because he just conveniently became a Met fan and then went back to being a Yankee fan. So anyway, closing time, right? Closing time. Final thoughts, dude. For me, it's crazy because I agree. NFL 100, the committee that picked, the 100 best players and the 100 best this, the 100 best that to celebrate the 100-year anniversary. They have this as the 10th best game ever, which I agree. But the funny thing is, it's probably the 5th, 6th, 7th best Super Bowl. But I agree that it's the 10th best game ever because just everything surrounding the game. I mean, I think it's the most dramatic backdrop for a sporting event in our nation's history. And it delivered with what was happening on the field. So just looking back on it, man, it's a special time. It's a time that's really hard to put, like I said earlier, it's tough to put it in perspective now because we've been through so much since, and it's hard to understand it if you weren't around, but it's just a special Super Bowl. And it shows really sports place in our culture because it was a time when we needed that. And I think, the leadership of the country understood, and that's why it was so important to play the game. We needed it. We needed sports. We need sports. It's that great distraction, and just looking back at it, you see, hey, man, sports has this important place in our society when we're going through things like that. And I think that's what made the game so special, really. You play this game. It's a good game, a very good game, actually, but you play it in another time period on a different day. Maybe it doesn't have that same impact. Still a good game, but just when it was played and what it meant to all of us is really what makes it so special. Pete, what do you got, man? Closing thoughts.
I'm on board with you with that. I mean, for a 25th Super Bowl anniversary, I mean, the game gave you everything. Gave you defense, gave you offense, made you sit there and wonder. Watching it again, so many years after, picking up on the miscues and the mistakes, but you realize the storylines in it, and it was just a really interesting and fun game to watch. I agree with you. It probably is one of the top 10 best Super Bowls, probably 6 or 7. It is probably one of the top 10 games ever played in the NFL. I think they're right. It was just a great game to watch it again and to relive it again and just to see the intricate ways that the Giants did things. And you can still see what's going on with that. Once again, to that coaching tree, continuing to go with that idea of game planning it out, understanding your opponent, and really playing a chess match, because that's what Belichick does every game. It is a chess match, and Coughlin, when any coach, especially against Belichick, was playing a chess match. It's quite unbelievable.
Other time, you've seen a lot. What do you think, man?
So for me, we've talked about legacy, and I'm going to continue with that. One person we haven't mentioned about the legacy is Phil Simms. No one talks about his legacy because he's not even close to being a Hall of Famer, right? But if he actually played and won the Super Bowl, and I know he might not have won because I actually do think that they played harder in a way and had to get a great game plan for a guy who had legs. But let's say he does win that Super Bowl. That's 2 Super Bowls. That's 2 Super Bowls with a New York team, and honestly, I consider him a 2-time Super Bowl champion because, hey, it's not like he didn't play during that regular season. He led him to 10-1, I believe, before he got injured. Yeah. I mean, and I know Phil Simms, he doesn't consider himself a 2-time champion because he has said that, I kind of remember hearing him saying, well, I guess I was glad we won, But he did so much for that team, and he built part of the toughness of that team. And so I wish he would give himself a little more credit. And I don't believe he should be Hall of Famer, even if he would have won. I don't mean to pick on you with Eli Manning, but I do feel that, they're both similar, that they both won 2 if he would have won that one, and they both have good careers, not great. But I think that Phil Simms, his whole life would have been a little different and a little better if he would have won that Super Bowl. And obviously he would have, had the job the next year. And I just kind of feel like Phil Simms is a little looked over. He went 10-1. He brought that team to a really good record, made sure they made the playoffs and had a mindset. And I think he deserves a little more.
Yeah, well, they start 10-0. They get killed by the Eagles 31-13 to go 10-1. Then they play that brutal game. The next week they go to San Francisco, that Monday Night Football game where it's like the most hyped Monday Night Football game in history. And they lose 7-3. It's a boring game where there's no offense. So at that point, they're 10-2. They beat the Vikings the following week, and they're 11-2. And then I think that's when he gets hurt in that game that they're going to wind up losing to the Bills. So yeah, dude, it's sad because if he's there, I think the key is the New York thing. I think if he wins the 2 Super Bowls being on the New York team, especially with, what he did on that stage in Super Bowl 21, he probably gets in. So it's sad. It's sad, I think, the way we define people's legacies. But Simms is the sad part here. I don't know if they win with him, but it would have been good to see, what would have happened. Might have been fun for him. It definitely is a stage, though, that Hostetler takes advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, hey, man, 1991. It's been fun visiting 1991. It's been fun seeing Marky Mark. It's been fun seeing Billy Crystal with the Med hat on, and it's been fun reliving this Super Bowl. Time to head back to 2020, and we're going to visit some other places soon. But it was a great one, and now it's time to go on to another one for the ages. So we thank you guys for listening, and we're going to come up with another great game next time. So, keep listening to the Sports Pod Time Machine, and we're going to go back to all these historic games. And we'll go into the past. We'll go into the future. It was a lot of fun. Until next time, guys, and hope you enjoyed it.
Copyright 2021 Yackers Huddle Media Group, Inc., all rights reserved.